The great irony of populism is that it always arrives wearing clothes of democracy. It never kicks the front door in. It rings the bell politely, smiles at the voters, kisses babies, complains about corrupt elites, and promises to give the country back to the real people. And then once inside, it quietly changes the locks. For years, Viktor Orbán looked like one of those locks that would never again be opened from the outside. He had mastered the modern art of democratic domination so thoroughly that Hungary began to feel less like a normal European state and more like an escape room designed by a constitutional lawyer with unresolved childhood issues. The opposition looked fragmented, exhausted, hopeless. Orbán had the media, the state machinery, the cultural narrative, the nationalist mythology, the financial networks, and perhaps most importantly, the exhausting aura of inevitability. And yet, suddenly, impossibly, he lost. Hungary, after Orbán, now joins a very small but increasingly interesting club. Countries that discovered that populists, despite all their chest-thumping rhetoric about destiny and history and civilization itself, can in fact be removed. Poland already showed it in 2023, when the Law and Justice Party, another nationalist machine that seemed welded permanently into the state, was voted out after years of institutional trench warfare. Apparently, democracy still possesses a pulse. Even after being repeatedly declared dead by political commentators who spend too much time on Twitter and not enough time touching grass. The important thing here is not merely that Orbán lost. Populists lose elections all the time somewhere in the world. The important thing is how he lost, and what that teaches the rest of us about defeating modern authoritarian populism without tanks, revolutions, or dramatic balcony speeches. Because defeating these movements is hard, really hard. They are emotionally powerful. They feed on identity, grievance, fear, nostalgia, and exhaustion. They simplify the world into a Netflix series with very clear villains. Brussels, migrants, journalists, George Soros, gender ideology, globalists, intellectuals, cyclists, whoever happens to be available. And once populists capture institutions, the playing field tilts. Elections still happen, but they begin to resemble football matches where one team owns the stadium, hires the referees, controls the TV broadcast, and occasionally changes the rules during halftime, which makes Hungary's reversal fascinating. It also offers 5 lessons for Europe and the rest of the world. The first lesson is painfully simple. Opposition parties must stop treating each other as their primary enemy. This sounds obvious. It apparently is not. For years, democratic oppositions across Europe behaved like medieval city-states during an Ottoman invasion. Liberals hated conservatives. Conservatives hated Greens. Greens hated Social Democrats. Everyone hated everyone on Twitter. Meanwhile, the populists sat calmly in the middle, united by one crucial advantage. They actually wanted power. Orbán benefited enormously from this fragmentation. Every divided election became a gift. Every opposition ego trip added another brick to his palace. Poland learned this first. The anti-PiS coalition succeeded not because its members suddenly fell in love with one another. They absolutely did not. But because they understood a basic mathematical reality. In an electoral system tilted toward the ruling party, fragmentation becomes political suicide. Hungary finally learned the same lesson. There's something deeply unromantic about this. We prefer heroic stories, charismatic saviors, epic speeches, historic moments. But democratic survival often depends on boring, humiliating compromise between people who privately find each other unbearable. Unfortunately for political romantics, that is how functioning democracies actually work. The second lesson is that populists are strongest when they monopolize emotion and weakest when they monopolize exhaustion. Orbán was brilliant at emotional politics. He transformed every election into a civilizational battle. Hungary was always 5 minutes away from destruction by migrants, Brussels bureaucrats, LGBTQ activists, NGOs, foreign bankers, or whatever terrifying threat happened to fit the weekly narrative cycle. Fear is politically intoxicating. So is pride. Orbán understood this instinctively. Many democratic opponents did not. For years, liberal opposition campaigns sounded like PowerPoint presentations created by consultants who had once hugged a spreadsheet. They spoke the language of institutional integrity, while Orbán spoke the language of survival, identity, and national destiny. Guess which one human beings emotionally respond to? But eventually populist governments develop a problem that no amount of propaganda can fully eliminate. Fatigue. People get tired. Not angry necessarily. Just tired. Tired of permanent outrage. Tired of enemies everywhere. Tired of being told civilization is collapsing every Thursday afternoon. Tired of culture wars replacing functioning hospitals. tired of politicians performing apocalypse while potholes grow large enough to develop ecosystems. At some point, drama loses its electricity. This is where populists become vulnerable, not when they appear terrifyingly strong, but when they begin to feel repetitive. The third lesson is perhaps the most uncomfortable. Institutions matter far more than political theater. This is frustrating because political theater is more entertaining. Institutions are boring. Courts are boring. Media laws are boring. Electoral commissions are boring. Constitutional safeguards are boring. Nobody has ever screamed with excitement while reading procedural judicial reform documents on a beach holiday, and yet these dull mechanisms determine whether democracies survive. Orbán understood this long before many Europeans did. He did not merely govern Hungary, he re-engineered it. Media ecosystems were reshaped, electoral districts redesigned, loyalists embedded throughout the state apparatus. Public broadcasting transformed into something resembling an expensive national group chat dedicated entirely to praising Viktor Orbán. Modern populists rarely abolish democracy outright. That would alarm people unnecessarily. Instead, they preserve democratic rituals while hollowing out democratic competition. The genius of this system lies in plausibility. Technically, elections still occur. Technically, opposition parties still exist. Technically, newspapers still publish criticism. And technically, I could challenge Mike Tyson to a boxing match tomorrow. Some competitions are more equal than others, which is why institutional recovery after populism becomes so difficult. Removing the leader is only step one. Rebuilding the credibility of institutions is step 2 through 27. Poland is currently discovering this in real time. Hungary now will too, because populism leaves behind institutional distrust like cigarette smoke and old curtains. Even after the source disappears, the smell remains. The fourth lesson may be the hardest for liberals to accept. Moral superiority is not a political strategy. For years, much of Europe's democratic opposition spoke about populist voters as if they were unfortunate laboratory accidents produced by Facebook algorithms and insufficient university attendance. This was catastrophically arrogant. Many Orbán voters were not irrational. They had genuine fears about economic insecurity, cultural change, national identity, migration, corruption, or social fragmentation. One can disagree with their conclusions while still understanding that these concerns were emotionally real. Populists succeed because they answer emotional questions that technocrats often ignore. Who belongs? Who protects me? Who sees me? Who speaks for me? What happens to my country, to my children, to my dignity? You cannot defeat populism simply by fact-checking it. Human beings are not Excel sheets with legs. We are emotional creatures desperately trying to construct meaning inside chaotic societies. The democratic opposition succeeds only when it offers a competing emotional story, one rooted not in fear and resentment, but in competence, dignity, stability, and hope. Hope sounds cheesy, unfortunately, which is why cynical politicians underestimate it. But societies cannot survive permanently on outrage. Eventually, people want a future again. And finally, the fifth lesson. Populists fall when they begin believing their own mythology. This is the oldest political story in existence. Success creates isolation. Isolation creates arrogance. Arrogance creates stupidity. Long-ruling populists gradually stop hearing reality. They surround themselves with loyalists, flatterers, propagandists, oligarchs, consultants, and television hosts whose primary professional skill consists of applauding aggressively. The result is informational decay. Bad decisions multiply because nobody wants to contradict the leader. Corruption spreads because the ruling network begins treating the state like an Airbnb rental with no security deposit. Economic stagnation gets hidden beneath patriotic slogans. Political instincts become detached from ordinary life. Eventually, the ruling elite starts sounding weird. You can observe this pattern everywhere. In Russia, in Turkey, in Venezuela, in late-stage populist governments generally. The rhetoric becomes increasingly theatrical precisely because reality becomes increasingly disappointing. And then something quietly breaks. Not necessarily in the economy first, not necessarily in the institutions first, but in the psychological atmosphere. The spell weakens. People stop believing the leader is inevitable. And once inevitability disappears, populists suddenly look strangely fragile. The giant inflatable dragon turns out to require enormous quantities of hot air. This is why Orbán's defeat matters beyond Hungary itself. For years, nationalist populists cultivated an image of historical destiny. Liberal democracy was supposedly decadent, exhausted, weak, unable to defend borders, culture, religion, identity, civilization, masculinity, Christmas traditions, or apparently even ordinary kitchen appliances anymore. Orbán presented himself not merely as a Hungarian politician, but as a civilizational prototype. The future of Europe: strong borders, Christian nationalism, controlled media, managed democracy, cultural warfare, permanent enemies, electoral dominance. And many people believed him. Some still do, but history has an irritating habit of humiliating those who declare themselves permanent. The Soviet Union looked permanent. Franco looked permanent. Ceausescu looked permanent. The Berlin Wall looked permanent, too. Even low-rise jeans in the early 2000s briefly looked permanent. And humanity thankfully survived that catastrophe, too. Political systems are strongest shortly before they suddenly are not. This does not mean democracy automatically wins. Democracies are messy, frustrating, slow, contradictory, frequently ridiculous systems. They produce coalition negotiations that feel like hostage situations conducted inside conference centers with bad coffee. But democracies possess one extraordinary advantage over authoritarian populism: renewal. They can correct themselves. Painfully, slowly, imperfectly. But still, that ability matters more than charisma, more than propaganda, more than nationalism, more than strongmen performing masculinity on television while standing near fences. Hungary's post-Orbán era will not be magical. Populism never disappears overnight. The networks remain. The grievances remain. The polarization remains. Half the country will still distrust the other half. Institutions damaged over years cannot be repaired by optimistic speeches and fresh logos. But something important has already happened. The illusion of invincibility broke. And once citizens realize that even very powerful populists can lose democratically, politics changes everywhere else too. Because authoritarian populism survives largely through psychological domination. It wants citizens to feel exhausted before they even begin resisting. It wants opposition voters to internalize hopelessness. It wants democracy to feel futile. Hungary just reminded Europe that it is not, which may be the most dangerous thing a populist government can allow people to remember. All of this, of course, only works where institutions still function, however bruised and bent they may be, and where populists retain at least a tiny residual instinct for self-preservation, enough to eventually accept defeat instead of barricading themselves inside the presidential palace with a national flag and increasingly erratic television speeches. But what happens with real dictators? What happens when leaders no longer merely weaken democracy, but fully replace it with themselves? When the courts are gone, the opposition is gone, the press is gone, and the ruler's survival becomes indistinguishable from the survival of the state itself. Well, that is where things usually stop being politically depressing and start becoming historically catastrophic. Because unlike populists, dictators rarely leave quietly. They tend to drag entire countries down with them like a cruise ship captain who, upon spotting the iceberg, decides to accelerate out of pure spite. So in our next video, let's look at the downfall of dictators, how dictatorships collapse, why strongmen almost always overstay, and why the final chapter of dictatorship so often ends somewhere between tragedy, farce, and a very expensive reconstruction bill.